Good morning. Thank you for joining us for today's MDICx webinar. Our topic today is CDRH's PMA Critical to Quality Pilot. My name is Stephanie Christopher. I'm the Program Director for MDIC's Case for Quality, and we're delighted to be able to share this webinar with you. This Critical to Quality Pilot is a part of the larger Case for Quality initiative within CDRH, and we're delighted to be able to have Bleda and Roxanne here today with us to share what they've learned from the pilot so far and to tell you a little bit more about how you can get involved in the pilot. So our speakers today are Bleda Vinicki. She is a Quality System Specialist at CDRH Office of Compliance in the Division of Manufacturing and Quality, and Roxanne Maderas, who is a reviewer in the Cardiovascular Device branch at CDRH. And with that, I will turn it over to Bleda.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar to further discuss the PMA Critical to Quality or CCQ pilot program that's currently ongoing here at the center. Part of the team, the PMA CCQ pilot team, is myself, Bleda Vinicki, Roxanne Maderas, who today will go through a few examples related to the critical to quality attributes and critical characteristics that have been identified as part of the cardiovascular device branch. As well as we have Bill McFarland, who's also part of the team, and he'll help answer any questions that you may have at the end of the webinar. And Phil LaFleur is also part of the team, but not able to join today. So during today's webinar, I'll talk about a little bit about the background of Case for Quality, how it was initiated, and how the Critical to Quality PMA pilot fits into the bigger Case for Quality umbrella. We'll talk a little bit about the PMA Critical to Quality pilot structure, as well as define some of the concepts and definitions that we've noticed that have come up over the past few months. And again, Roxanne will go through a few examples, and we're happy to take any questions at the end of the presentation. So Case for Quality. So why was Case for Quality initiated? Primarily, or CDRH had noted that there's no stakeholder engagement across the medical device ecosystem. There's a high industry focus on compliance and not on the quality practices. And also there was no competitive market around medical device quality. What we hope to gather from the pilots that are currently ongoing is collaborating with industry and other organizations and focus on organizational excellence and product quality. With that, identify new ways to assess organizational performance, adapt regulatory oversight to increase agility, responsiveness, simplification, error proofing, as well as drive connections within systems to increase visibility into product quality within the marketplace. So how did or when did CDRH launch the Critical to Quality initiative? So in 2011, CDRH launched the Case for Quality to elevate the focus of all medical device stakeholders from baseline regulatory compliance to sustain predictive practices that advance medical device quality and safety to achieve better patient outcomes. During that time, CDRH also published an in-depth report, and this can be found online. To summarize, the review identified that an investment in quality has long-term payoff. In 2013, FDA initiated the implantable device that contained batteries critical to quality inspection pilot. We received very positive feedback during this pilot, both from industry as well as ORA investigators. As you'll see here, some of the feedback received was that inspection efficiency, resource utilization, open dialogue. It was very helpful for both industry as well as FDA to be on the same page and understand the devices in the technical terms and be able to have those discussions during the inspection. In 2014, FDA decided to draft more CCQs, or what we call technical documents. FDA, alongside with Advamet, drafted 13 technical documents, which unfortunately these were not published because as we're going through the process, we noted that the pathway that we would be able to publish them would be through a guidance document. And that was not our intent. The intent was not to add additional burden or requirement in industry or FDA. The intent was more to provide additional information related to specific devices that could help facilitate some of the dialogue internally with ORA as well as industry. One of those documents was the PMA CCQ document, which is now the pilot that we're discussing. The PMA CCQ document is similar as the implantable devices that contain battery. But as you know, even from the title, that was focused on the inspection and the identifying the critical to quality, and as well as focusing on what the investigator would look for during inspection. Versus the PMA CCQ document, as we'll go through in a little bit, it's more focused on industry, internal to FDA CDRH, what we can do to help facilitate as well as drive quality improvements within the medical device industry, as well as quality improvements within FDA as we're reviewing the PMA manufacturing section. We wanted to touch on the Voluntary Medical Device Manufacturing and Product Quality Pilot Program. This is also part of a Case for Quality pilot. It's in collaboration with MDIC, FDA, and CMMI, as well as the PMA Critical to Pilot program. We wanted to emphasize that an industry or an organization could volunteer to participate on both pilot programs. When we had a webinar with Advamet a month or so ago, one of the questions that came up was, how does CCQ fit into the Case for Quality? After that, there's been some discussions internally to possibly merge the two. As some of you may already know, that one of the benefits on the Case for Quality pilot, or the Voluntary Medical Device Manufacturing and Product Quality Pilot program, is the modification on the PMA manufacturing. And there's been discussion to potentially adopt the PMA CCQ pilot concept into the Case for Quality as part of the PMA modification. Again, that's not final. However, there's been discussion along those terms. Okay, so PMA CCQ pilot, it is a voluntary pilot, just like the voluntary medical device, the Case for Quality pilot. It is an ongoing effort to promote medical device quality, and is a joint effort between CDRH and ORA, Office of Regulatory Affairs. The program aims to promote quality in device manufacturing, evaluate device design and manufacturing process quality information early on to assist FDA in its review of the PMA manufacturing section, and as well as the post-market inspections, which would be conducted by ORA. FDA does believe that focusing on features and characteristics considered critical to the safety and effectiveness of the device may lead to fewer device failure, a decrease in device recalls, as well as improved device innovation and efficiencies. The PMA CCQ pilot program is based on the Six Sigma principles of ensuring awareness of critical features and controls. Later during this webinar, we'll provide examples of the Six Sigma concept and what FDA considers what we're looking for under the PMA CCQ. It is built on lessons learned from the implantable device battery pilot, which I discussed earlier. The PMA CCQ pilot would allow enrollment of 9 PMAs that meet the enrollment criteria identified in the Federal Registry notice. And the pilot program is scheduled to run until December 31st of this year. So the process starts with a pre-PMA Q submission meeting. We've included the guidance document for your reference here. The intent was that we engage with industry earlier on before the PMA is submitted to have discussions on what we would be expecting during the pilot or during the review of the manufacturing section. Some of the things that have been laid out in the Federal Registry notice is, in addition to what the guidance document requires, is that you also draft a cover letter noting your interest for the PMA CCQ pilot program. But in addition, providing a list of facilities that have responsibility on manufacturing, design, packaging, sterilization for the device under review. As well as, if available, provide a draft list of your critical characteristics for the device which is subject to the PMA application. This would allow us to have a better dialogue during the pre-PMA Q submission meeting. At that time, we intend to discuss the draft CCQs, if those were available or provided for review. And as well as understand earlier on whether the applicant would meet all the requirements that have been set in the Federal Registry notice. So in addition to the pre-PMA Q submission meeting, there's other participation criteria that have been identified, which, similar to the case for quality pilot, the facility must be in compliance with the Regulation Act. But in addition to that, they would have to provide the list of critical to quality characteristics and attributes, as well as their controls at the time of the PMA submission. FDA would look at those for clarity, completeness, and relevance, as well as provide feedback whenever necessary. One of the other requirements is the manufacturing section of the PMA. We want to ensure that there's no deficiencies that have been identified during the review. If there's concerns or questions that a reviewer has, they will engage as soon as possible to help resolve those issues or concerns earlier on. So what's in it for FDA? CDRH and ORA can use the information identified in the PMA application, so which would include the list of critical to quality characteristics as well as their controls. prioritize the time spent in the manufacturing section review, but also provide that information to the investigators for the post-market inspection, which they would utilize to focus their time spent at the facility, as well as focus on those aspects of the device that have been identified as critical or impact the device quality. We've provided a link to the Federal Registry notice for your reference, which would identify the process as well as the requirements in order for an organization to seek interest or be enrolled into the PMA CCQ pilot program. Some of the feedback received to date has been more related to the concepts or the definitions, and that FDA had not provided a lot of information earlier on. And during this time, we'd like the opportunity to address some of the misconceptions, and we'll go through we'll clarify the CCQ concept as well as other key definitions, and provide some examples to assist with an organization developing the PMA CCQ list of attributes and as well as controls. So what is the term critical to quality? It's defined differently. However, as you'll note here, there's a lot of similarities between the Six Sigma as well as what FDA is expecting as far or how we're defining the critical to quality concept. So that implementing quality, a practice guide to tools and techniques define CCQ as key output characteristics of a process. An example may be an element of a design or an attribute of a service that is critical to the eyes of the customer. I want to highlight the eyes of the customer because, as you'll note later, that's very important to us. The Six Sigma best practices defines as CCQ as a product or service characteristics that must be matched to satisfy a specification or a requirement. And the certified Six Sigma handbook defines it as the CCQ's purpose is to start with a high-level strategic goal of customer satisfaction and determine how this goal flows down into measurable goals. So identifying the critical characteristics of a process is necessary in order to determine strategies for improving the output of the process. Six Sigma defines a critical characteristic as the product characteristics or product features that are comprehensively defined by both the internal as well as external customers. FDA, where are we today and how we define it, is that features and characteristics of the device most likely to impact its safety and effectiveness. So aspects of the device that fulfill the user's needs. We've included some other key definitions such as design output and essential design output because we've noted that there's a misconception between a design output or essential design output and a critical to quality characteristic. Again, we want to take the focus out of the design output and focus more on the user and define where the essential controls are. But we want to highlight these two terms because we do think that they're important, but also address some of the other misconceptions. So design outputs, the results of a design effort at each design phase and at the end of a total design effort. The finished device output is the basis of the device master records. The essential design outputs are those design outputs that are essential for the proper functioning of the device. What is FDA's approach on CCQ? An individual CCQ is a control that ensures that the critical features and characteristics are consistently achieved in order for the device to be safe and effective. So think of the what is essential to the user and identifying the relevant controls needed to ensure that the needs are consistently met. I'm going to turn it over to Roxanne to walk us through the Six Sigma CCQ tree, as well as other examples that have been drafted in order to further explain the CCQ concept.
Thank you. So our first example is the Six Sigma CCQ tree. This is an illustration of a process used with Six Sigma's MDICx, E-M-A-I-C, to ensure process efficiency results. It is used to reduce variability and drive quality. The intent is to focus more on the user and what the drivers are to help meet the product quality and what is important in the eyes of the user. The Six Sigma, so we have here our end user need is portable and rechargeable cardiac monitor, and you can bring that back to the critical characteristics, the driver, which then feeds back into the user need. So the Six Sigma CCQ tree implies that the critical characteristics should also be controlled through the design and manufacturing process, which is how FDA structured the PMA CCQ pilot. Our next example, we generated an FDA's approach to CCQ. We gave defibrillation leads as our example, and the similarities would be that this is slightly modified to show that the FDA, what they're thinking on CCQ concepts. Per Six Sigma tree, you have user needs, driver, and critical characteristics, which are identical. We added the controls associated with the critical characteristics. The intent of CCQ is to control the life cycle of the product to meet user needs and product quality. So one example, we're going to go through the bottom one, which the critical characteristic is sterility and biocompatibility at the bottom of the screen. So starting from the right, you have the control, which is design, manufacturing, process control. Our critical characteristics that we're looking at for defibrillation leads could be also sterility and biocompatibility. And then the driver for that would be the package hermeticity and bioburden, as well as material contact and chemical composition. And finally, that would bring us to our user need, which would be lack of adverse response from the intent of the lead. So what do we mean by control? Mechanisms, when established and maintained, promote the design and manufacture of safe and effective medical device. Examples of this could include essential design outputs, supplier agreements, and process testing, IQ, OQ, PQ, acceptance criteria, and so on. We have another example, which is the surgical mesh. So critical product characteristics we identified were mesh thickness, mesh weave characteristics, pore size, mesh density, tensile strength, device stiffness, suture pull-out strength, burst strength, and tear resistance. If there is an inadequate control of these critical product characteristics, you could potentially see in the field adverse events and failures of the device, which could result in physical degradation of the mesh, migration, erosion, and granulomas. So in order to control for these scenarios, one could identify these product characteristics during the design stage along with acceptance criteria. You could also perform acceptance activities to ensure that the acceptance criteria for the critical product characteristics are being met. And then we wanted to provide you an example format. You as the expert for the product can provide the key critical characteristics, the importance or user needs for that device, and the impact of failure for the driver. So the control information would be identifying the controls in device design, feature design, and quality manufacturing control practices as they apply. FDA will be reviewing the CCQ for a list for clarity, completeness, and relevance. If there are disagreements in our review team will engage in further discussion with you as the applicant. So this is just an example. We hope it's useful if you apply for the pilot.
So again, in high level, the PMA CCQ pilot program is voluntary and is part of the Case for Quality, I would say, bigger umbrella. The pilot would allow enrollment of 9 PMAs that meet the enrollment criteria, as well as to provide the list of critical features and controls within their PMA submission. As Roxanne went through how Six Sigma defines critical to quality versus how FDA defines critical to quality concepts are very similar. Our intent is to ensure that we're controlling those features or attributes that are critical to device quality from the design and manufacturing all the way to the end user. A company, again, can voluntarily enroll in both the voluntary medical device manufacturing product quality pilot program, as well as the pre-market approval for the PMA CCQ pilot program. The pilot will run through December 31st, and the processes start with a pre-PMA Q-submission meeting in order for FDA to engage with the applicant earlier on in the process and define the expectations, as well as build those relationships prior to the PMA being submitted to the agency for review. We'd like now to take this time to address any questions that anyone may have. They can be submitted through the chat box. Stephanie, I can turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Bleda and Roxanne. As you said, it looks like we have the Q&A box where you can submit your questions. Our first question is, how many companies are enrolled in the pilot currently?
We've received a lot of inquiries related to the pilot. We have a lot less applicants than we initially had thought when we published the Federal Registry notice. And some of those reasons are that the agency currently has a lot of pilots that are ongoing, including the Case for Quality. There's also the MDICx program, and so choosing between which pilots to participate has been one of the challenges that we've noticed.
And along, an additional follow-on question to that. So the program is open 9/29 of 2017 to 12/31/18. Does the PMA submission need to be within that time frame?
The PMA, yes. So the PMA submission does need to be within that time frame. But if the organization is interested, we will still engage, even if the intent is that the PMA will be submitted after the pilot timeframe.
Great, and we did have a follow-up to the question on how many enrolled. So do you have an idea of how many are currently enrolled, or it sounds like you maybe have some that are in process, or not quite enrolled but interested in enrolling. Can you give a little bit more clarity, especially since there seems to be a limit of 9?
There's plenty of room for others to enroll, and if we exceed the 9, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are willing to engage earlier on. Again, this is a pilot, so we want to learn as much as possible during this process. That shouldn't affect an industry or for not engaging earlier on or not submitting a pre-PMA2 submission to have further discussions related to the pilot.
Bleda, you alluded to this, and we've had this question come up, I know, within the Case for Quality, the maturity model pilot. There are a lot of pilots going on at CDRH right now. How are you able to kind of help industry participants navigate all of those potential pilot opportunities?
So within the FDA website, there is a summary related to all the pilots that are currently ongoing. Again, the PMA CCQ pilot is, it's not an additional requirement per se. There's no charge to participate in the pilot. The Case for Quality pilot, the voluntary medical device pilot that's also currently ongoing, that requires some funding, but as well as the MDICx program, that's a bigger program, and as well as we realize that there is an impact for those organizations that plan to distribute or market products within Canada, for example. There is a lot of information in the FDA website, and if anyone has other questions and need help navigating or finding additional information, we would be a good resource, and we're willing to provide any guidance that someone might need.
Great, thank you. Does the submission of CTQ information allow simplification of other aspects of the PMA submission?
Hello, this is Bill McFarland. You know, I think one benefit of having the critical to quality information, it helps address part of our review, or we're trying to map between what's the device, what's important, and what aspects of manufacturing or even design control do I, the reviewer, need to dig into versus more make sure that the fundamental requirements are met. So, you know, where firms already, in my experience, and they have a lot of different ways that they do it, they write an upfront narrative, they provide mapping tables, there's all sorts of means that PMA applicants use to help us traverse their manufacturing section. You know, the PMA CCQ table could be used to help communicate that information, just like they have other ways of just helping us understand how to find what's in the document and what information submitted is more important than other information. That's one thing that comes to mind is, you know, where they have mapping tables or narratives. It could be used to supplement or even possibly replace that, depending on how they write it.
Great, thank you. So I understand that combination products are outside of the scope of this pilot. Has the agency thought about potentially expanding the pilot to include combination products?
So currently, because combination products would involve the review of 2 centers or multiple centers. Take an example, a CDER and CDRH. CDER has not adapted the pilot program, so we wouldn't be able to identify have those engagements related to the drug component of the PMA device. Currently, during the pilot phase, we want to learn as much as possible and see whether this is helpful, and then potentially even expanding the CCQs to include combination products. And that would include or exclude potentially the manufacturers that manufacture the device components of the PMA application. Those are things that are currently being discussed, but again, nothing has finalized at this point. We're just looking to learn more during the pilot phase.
Great, thank you. Can you maybe expand a little bit more, or talk a little bit more about what this program might look like in the future? So the pilot's set to run through this year. Have you had a chance to think about what this may look like next year, or whether the pilot will continue, or what's kind of the criteria for deciding what those next steps may look like?
We have not been discussing as far as what would potentially happen after the December 31st. There's been discussions with the Case for Quality working group to potentially adapt the PMA CCQ concept within the Case for Quality pilot or program in the future. So that's been discussed, and that could potentially, I guess, you could look for maybe seeing some of the PMA CCQ concept being adapted in the Case for Quality pilot, but nothing more has been thought of or discussed here at the agency.
Great, thank you. Question about the CTQ documents themselves. How will the FDA investigator utilize those CTQ documents? Should industry expect to receive potential observations related to the implementation of CTQs?
So the CTQ concept is not required by the regulation. So we're not, the intent of the pilot or the CTQ document is not to add additional burden in industry or cite them as observation during the inspection. However, the investigator will be able to use that information to focus their time during the post-market inspection, to focus their review within what the industry, what the organization considers critical for that device, as well as what FDA has already looked at. Now, that doesn't exclude them from noting observations related to, let's say, design output or the essential design output, which may also be a critical characteristic that the organization has identified. But you should not be seeing any observations related to the lack of, let's say, properly defining CCQs. It's more they will still focus, they will use the QCIT approach to conduct the inspection. However, it's not a new requirement, and that's not something that you should be seeing or expect to see in the future.
Related to that, you know, with regards to implementing these critical to quality factors, will industry need to establish a specific process or program related to CTQ to ensure that FDA's expectations are being met?
So we're not expecting that a new program be implemented or established at an organization. Our thinking is that the CCQ is just mapping the information or what's currently required in a way that it's easier to review and to focus, not just agency to focus our review and what the industry considers critical, but also for the investigators to better understand the components or the critical attributes or characteristics of that device. Now, that doesn't mean that we're precluding you from defining a process. If you believe that that's important to your organization, then you may draft a procedure or have a program in place, but it's not something that agency is requiring at this point.
Great, thank you. Appear to have had a technical glitch here. I lost my Q&A screen for a moment. And I think you answered this, or kind of directly answered, or indirectly answered this. Is the agency, or do you anticipate that the agency is going to be providing additional guidance on CCQs at some point?
Did you just change the screen, Stephanie? Or?
Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. It says we're reconnecting, so we're still on the line, and we still have all our listeners on the line. We just maybe have a momentary glitch on the screen itself.
Yeah, thank you. So to answer that question, so we're not thinking that we're going to provide additional guidance. However, we have been conducting some webinars to provide additional information or guidances to an organization, including examples. And if there's further need to continue to have these discussions or webinars, we're definitely willing to engage in that way and schedule more webinars to focus maybe in areas that is interested to the medical device industry. I would just suggest to provide that feedback, whether through MDIC or even the case for quality, the CCQ mailbox, which it's part of, if I can scroll back, I can't, but it's part of the presentation, which you'll also have available. You may be able to provide questions through, there you go, the CCQ at fda.hhs.gov, and we're willing to host additional webinars to provide clarity on any concepts or in any area that the industry believes we need to further communicate.
Great, thank you. And the email address is up on the screen, and as always, you can always send questions to MDIC as well, and we're happy to communicate those questions to CDRH. I want to give everyone a chance. We still have a few minutes left to answer any or ask any additional questions. While we're waiting to see if there's any additional questions, I do want to mention we have 2 more webinars coming up later in the next month or so. On August 15th, MDIC will be hosting a webinar on our Science of Patient Input initiative, where we will be presenting on the results of a collaborative project that we did with FDA, MIT, RTI Health Solutions, and the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research on using patient preference information to inform the design of clinical trials. And then coming up on September 12th, we'll have our 3rd quarter update on the CDRH voluntary quality pilot program, which we've alluded to here today, where you'll get an update on the enrollment in that pilot and lessons learned both from CDRH and from our industry participants.
I will add one more thing. So if anyone on the phone that has joined the webinar has any questions or input or maybe other ideas, please feel free to share those with us. We're willing to listen, and again, part of the fact that this is a pilot is really more of a learning opportunity for agencies to learn and potentially adapt as we move forward with whether it's the PMA CCQ pilot or the case for quality pilot that we've been mentioning throughout this webinar.
Terrific. We will also be making the slides from today's webinar as well as the recording from the webinar available on the MDIC website. You will get an email once that is available. So I don't see any other questions coming in through the chat. So I want to thank our speakers, Roxanne and Bleda. Thank you so much for sharing this with us today. And as always, if you have additional questions, please let us know. Otherwise, we hope we will see you at a future webinar in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone.